In this video, we're going to explore the extraordinary life of Isaac Newton. How a solitary, obsessive mind completely changed the way we understand the universe. From the laws of motion and gravity to breakthroughs in optics and calculus, Newton laid the foundations of the modern scientific world. This video is a mix of biography and invention, inspired by the structure of Walter Isaacson's Einstein, his life and universe. If you've read that book, let me know in the comments. I have, by the way, and I was genuinely fascinated by Isaacson's writing style. So this kicks off a series I'm calling Genius Minds, where I'll do something similar with some of the greatest minds in history, telling their stories while highlighting the world-changing contributions they made for all of us. All right, let's get started. In a garden on a summer afternoon in 1666, an apple falls from a tree. Just an apple. Just gravity doing what gravity does. But one man is watching. And in that moment, something clicks in his mind that will change everything humanity knows about the universe. This is not just a story about an apple. This is the story of how one solitary and obsessive mind unlocked the secrets of nature itself. How one man discovered the laws that govern everything. From the smallest pebble rolling down a hill to the massive planets circling the sun. From the light that enters your eyes to the forces that hold bridges together and send rockets into space. His name was Isaac Newton, and before him the universe was a mystery. After him it became something we could understand. Every calculation that puts a satellite in orbit, every bridge that stands against wind and weight, every prediction of where planets will be decades from now. All of it flows from the work of this one man. But here is what makes this story truly remarkable. Newton was not a pleasant person. He was angry, paranoid, unable to trust anyone. He spent most of his life alone, nursing grudges, hiding his discoveries, fighting bitter wars with other scientists. Yet somehow, from all that darkness and isolation, came the light of modern science. This is his story, the story of how one man invented the modern world. Chapter 1, The Boy No One Wanted, Christmas Day, 1642. In a small stone farmhouse in the English countryside, a baby is born 3 months early. So tiny he could fit in a quart mug, so weak nobody expects him to survive the night. His mother Hannah wraps him carefully, prays and waits. The baby lives. Against all odds, he lives. They name him Isaac after his father. But his father is already dead. He died 3 months before the baby was born. This child will never know his father's face, never hear his voice. For the first 3 years of Isaac's life, it is just him and his mother. The farmhouse at Woolsthorpe Manor, fields and sheep and silence. Then, when Isaac is 3 years old, his mother does something that will shape everything about who he becomes. She remarries a wealthy rector named Barnabas Smith, and Barnabas Smith does not want a stepson. So Hannah makes a choice. She leaves Isaac behind. She goes to live with her new husband in a nearby village, and Isaac stays at Woolsthorpe with his grandmother. Imagine being 3 years old. Your father is dead, and now your mother leaves you. She visits sometimes, But she does not take you with her. She chooses her new husband over you. Isaac will carry this wound for the rest of his life. We know this because years later, as a teenager, Isaac writes a list of his sins in his diary. And one of the sins he confesses is this: threatening my father and mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. Think about that. A teenage boy so angry at his stepfather and mother that he threatens to burn them alive. This is not normal childhood rebellion. This is rage. Deep, unhealed, festering rage. This abandoned, angry boy grows up isolated. He has few friends. He does not play with other children much. Instead, he watches things. He builds little machines, windmills, water clocks, sundials. He draws on the walls of the farmhouse. He observes nature with an intensity that unsettles people. When he is 11, his mother sends him to grammar school in the nearby town of Grantham. He boards with an apothecary, a man who makes medicines. Isaac watches him mix chemicals and becomes fascinated. At school, Isaac is not a star student at first. He is middle of the class, unremarkable. But then one day another boy bullies him, punches him in the stomach, and something ignites in Isaac. He challenges the bully to a fight after school, and he wins. But winning the physical fight is not enough. Isaac decides he must also beat this boy academically. He begins studying with fierce determination, and soon he rises to the top of his class. This pattern will repeat throughout Newton's life. Any challenge, any insult, any competition becomes a battle he must win. He cannot let things go. He cannot share credit. He must be first. He must be right. He must dominate. When Isaac is 17, his mother's second husband dies. Hannah returns to Woolsthorpe, and she has a plan for Isaac. She wants him to become a farmer, to manage the estate, to live the quiet country life of a gentleman farmer. But Isaac is terrible at farming, absolutely hopeless. He forgets to watch the sheep. He sits under trees, reading books while the animals wander off. He pays a servant to do his work while he studies mathematics. Finally, his uncle and the schoolmaster from Grantham convince Hannah that Isaac is wasting his talents on a farm. In 1661, at age 18, Isaac Newton leaves Woolsthorpe and goes to Cambridge University. He is heading toward his destiny, but he has no idea what is coming. Neither does the world. Chapter 2. The Mediocre Student. When Isaac Newton arrives at Cambridge University in 1661, he is nobody, just another poor student from the countryside. He enters Trinity College as what they call a subcisar. This means he is so poor that he has to work as a servant to pay his way. He empties chamber pots for wealthy students. He serves them food. He does their laundry. This is humiliating for a proud young man. But Newton endures it, because he wants something these rich boys do not want. He wants knowledge. At first, Newton follows the standard curriculum: Aristotle's philosophy, ancient texts, the traditional way of understanding the world that universities had taught for centuries. But something is happening in the wider world of learning. A revolution is beginning. In Italy, Galileo had looked through a telescope and seen moons orbiting Jupiter. In France, Descartes had proposed that the universe works like a machine, following mathematical laws. In Germany, Kepler had discovered that planets move in ellipses, not perfect circles. These men were challenging everything the ancient philosophers had taught, and their books were starting to appear in Cambridge. Newton discovers these books in the library, and something ignites in his mind. He begins reading obsessively. Descartes' geometry, Galileo's physics, Kepler's astronomy. He fills notebooks with his thoughts, but these are not just notes. He is arguing with these great thinkers, questioning them, finding flaws in their logic. He starts a notebook with the title Questiones quidam philosophicae, certain philosophical questions. And in this notebook, he writes down his own ideas, wild ideas, dangerous ideas, ideas that contradict the established wisdom of the church and the universities. What is matter made of? What is light? What causes gravity? How do things move? Why does anything happen at all? While other students are drinking in taverns and chasing girls, Newton is alone in his room, late at night by candlelight, filling page after page with calculations and experiments and questions. Always questions. His fellow students think he is strange. He does not socialize. He barely speaks to anyone. He seems to exist in his own private world of thought. But Newton does not care what they think. He has discovered something more intoxicating than friendship. The thrill of solving problems no one else can solve. The rush of seeing patterns that no one else can see. He begins doing experiments, dangerous experiments. He stares at the sun in a mirror to understand vision, even though it hurts his eyes terribly. He presses on his own eyeball with a bodkin, a blunt needle, to see colored circles and shapes. He wants to understand how seeing works, and he is willing to risk his own eyesight to find out. This is not normal curiosity. This is obsession. In 1665, Newton takes his bachelor's degree. He is 22 years old, still unknown, still unremarkable to most people. The university plans to make him a junior fellow. His future seems set. A quiet life as a minor academic at Cambridge. But then something happens that will change everything. Not just for Newton, for all of human history. A terrible plague begins spreading through England, the Black Death, the same disease that had killed a third of Europe 3 centuries earlier. And it is back. Chapter 3. Plague Year, the miracle begins. The summer of 1665. London is dying. Tens of thousands of people are falling ill with the plague. Their lymph nodes swell into painful black lumps. They develop fevers. They die within days. The streets are filled with carts collecting bodies. Red crosses are painted on the doors of infected houses. The city is a nightmare. By autumn, the plague reaches Cambridge. The university closes. Professors and students flee to the countryside, hoping to escape the contagion. Isaac Newton packs his books and papers and returns to the place he came from. Woolsthorpe Manor, the farmhouse where he grew up, the scene of his childhood abandonment. He is 23 years old, and he expects to wait out the plague for a few months before returning to Cambridge. Instead, he stays for 18 months. And in that time, alone in his childhood home, cut off from the world, Isaac Newton has the most productive period of discovery that any human being has ever experienced. Historians will call it the Year of Miracles. Actually, it is more than a year. From summer 1665 to spring 1667. But what happens in that time is almost impossible to believe. Newton has no laboratory, no colleagues, no equipment except what he can make himself, just his mind, paper, ink, a few books, prisms he orders from fairs, and solitude, complete, uninterrupted solitude. And he begins to think. First, he tackles light. What is light? Why does it create colours? Why does it bend when it passes through glass or water? Everyone believes that light is pure and simple. White light is the natural state. Colours are somehow corruptions or modifications of pure light. Newton suspects this is wrong. But how can he prove it? He darkens his room completely. Then he cuts a small hole in the window shutter. A single thin beam of sunlight enters the dark room. He places a glass prism in the beam's path. And magic happens. Well, not magic. Science. But it looks like magic. The white beam of sunlight hits the prism and explodes into a rainbow of colours on the opposite wall. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. A spectrum of pure, brilliant colour. Newton stares at this. Everyone else who has seen this effect thinks the prism is creating the colours somehow, modifying the pure white light. But Newton sees something different. He thinks the white light is already a mixture. The prism is not creating colours. It is separating them. Like a mesh separating different-sized grains, each colour bends by a slightly different amount when passing through glass, so they spread out into a spectrum. But how can he prove this? He does something brilliant. He takes a second prism and places it upside down in the path of the separated colours. And he watches as the rainbow recombines back into white light. This is the proof. White light is not simple and pure. It is a mixture of all the colours. The prism does not create colours. It reveals what was always there. This discovery will revolutionize optics. It will lead to better telescopes, better microscopes, a complete understanding of how light behaves, but Newton tells no one. He writes it in his notebook, and he keeps it secret. Why? Because Newton trusts no one. The world hurt him when he was 3 years old, and he has never recovered. He cannot share. He cannot collaborate. He can only work alone. But light is just the beginning of what Newton accomplishes during the plague years. He starts thinking about motion. Why do things move the way they do? Galileo had discovered that falling objects accelerate. They fall faster and faster. But why? What causes this? And Newton begins developing a whole new way of thinking about motion. He imagines, what if motion does not need a cause? What if objects naturally keep moving unless something stops them? What if the natural state of things is to keep doing what they are already doing? This is radical. Aristotle taught that objects naturally come to rest. That movement requires a constant force. Newton is proposing the opposite, that objects in motion stay in motion, and objects at rest stay at rest, unless something interferes. He begins working out the mathematics of this. What are the laws that govern how things move? he fills notebooks with calculations, with thought experiments, with new ways of thinking about force and motion and change. And then he needs new mathematics to describe what he is discovering. The old mathematics is not powerful enough. So Newton invents new mathematics. He calls it the method of fluxions. Later, it will be called calculus. Calculus is a way of dealing with things that change, things that flow. How fast is something moving at this exact instant? How quickly is it accelerating? How do you calculate the area under a curve? Newton creates a whole new branch of mathematics to answer these questions. He is 23 years old, alone in a farmhouse during a plague, and he is inventing calculus. But even this is not the most important thing he does during the plague years. Chapter 4. The Secret of Light. Let us return to Newton's experiments with light, because what he does next shows you exactly who Isaac Newton is, his brilliance and his darkness. After his prism experiments, Newton becomes obsessed with understanding vision. How do eyes work? How does light create the sensation of seeing? Remember, Newton is willing to do anything to answer his questions. And I mean anything. He takes a bodkin. This is a thick, blunt needle, and he slides it behind his own eyeball, between the eyeball and the bone of the socket. He pushes it in as far as he can without damaging anything permanently. Then he presses on his eye with the needle, and he sees colored circles and shapes, phantoms of light that are not really there. He does this repeatedly, taking notes on what he sees, where the colors appear, how they change when he presses harder or softer. Can you imagine the pain, the insanity of doing this to yourself? But to Newton, this is just science. His body is a tool. Pain is irrelevant. Only knowledge matters. Then he does something even more dangerous. He stares directly at the sun, not glancing, staring, as long as he can stand it, to see what happens to his vision. His eyes are damaged. He can see the sun's image everywhere he looks, burned into his vision. He has to lock himself in a dark room for 3 days, keeping his eyes closed, waiting for his sight to recover. He nearly blinds himself, permanently, all to understand how light and eyes work together. This is the level of Newton's obsession. He risks his sight, his most precious tool as a scientist, to satisfy his curiosity. And what does he discover? He confirms that light entering the eye creates the sensation of vision. That pressure on the eye can also create visual sensations. That vision is a physical process, not magic, not supernatural, but mechanical, understandable, predictable. He also works out how lenses bend light, how telescopes work, and he realizes that all telescopes at this time have a fundamental flaw. They use lenses to focus light, but since different colors bend differently, the images are always slightly blurred with colored fringes around everything. Newton has an idea. What if you use a mirror instead of a lens? Mirrors reflect all colors equally. A telescope using mirrors would not have this problem. He designs a reflecting telescope. Later, when he returns to Cambridge, he will build one with his own hands. And it will be better than any telescope in England. smaller, more powerful, clearer. It will make him famous. But again, during the plague years, he tells no one. He writes it down. He works it out. And he waits. Why this secrecy? Why does Newton hide his genius? Because he is afraid. Afraid of criticism. Afraid of confrontation. Afraid that someone will steal his ideas or claim them as their own. His childhood wound of abandonment has created an adult who cannot bear vulnerability. Knowledge is power, and Newton will not give his power away, not to anyone, not until he is absolutely forced to. The plague years continue, and Newton's mind continues racing forward into territory no human mind has ever explored before. Chapter 5. The Apple and the Moon. It is late summer, 1666. Isaac Newton is in the garden at Woolsthorpe Manor, sitting, thinking, watching the world around him with that intense focus that defines him. An apple falls from a tree. This really happened. Newton himself told this story years later, though probably it did not hit him on the head. That part is myth. But he did see an apple fall, and he did start thinking about it. Why does the apple fall straight down? Why not sideways? Why not up? What force pulls it to the earth? Everyone knows that heavy things fall to the ground. This is obvious. But Newton asks a different question, a deeper question. What if this force that pulls the apple down extends further than we think? What if it reaches beyond the earth? What if it reaches all the way to the moon? The moon is always falling toward the earth, but it is also moving forward through space. So it falls in a curve, an orbit. It is constantly falling toward Earth, but constantly missing, like throwing a ball so fast that it keeps falling around the curve of the Earth instead of hitting the ground. This is Newton's stunning insight. The force that pulls an apple is the same force that holds the moon in orbit. The same force that keeps all the planets circling the sun. One force, universal. This is called gravity, and it is everywhere, acting between every object that has mass. The earth pulls on the apple pulls on the earth, the sun pulls on the planets pull on the sun. Every star pulls on every other star. One force governs the cosmos. Newton begins trying to work out the mathematics of this. If gravity pulls the moon toward Earth, how strong is that pull? How does it change with distance? Does it get weaker? How quickly? He suspects that gravity follows an inverse square law. This means if you double the distance, the force becomes 4 times weaker. If you triple the distance, it becomes 9 times weaker. Distance squared in the denominator. He tries to test this idea. He knows how fast the moon orbits. He knows roughly how far away it is. He does the calculations. Do his gravity ideas predict the correct orbit? His calculations do not quite work. Something is wrong. Either his theory is wrong or his numbers are wrong. Newton does not know which. The problem is that the measurements of Earth's size that Newton is using are inaccurate. People do not know exactly how big the Earth is yet. So Newton's numbers are slightly off, and his calculations do not match observations as perfectly as they should. Frustrated, Newton puts it aside. He has enough other things to work on: light, motion, mathematics. He will return to gravity later, when he has better information. But the seed is planted. The crucial insight is there. Gravity is universal. One force connects the heavens and the earth. The cosmos is unified by mathematical law. This idea will eventually become Newton's greatest achievement. But for now, it sits in his notebook, a mystery partly solved, waiting. Chapter 6. Return to Cambridge Spring, 1667. The plague has finally released its grip on England. The dying has stopped. London is recovering. Cambridge University reopens. Isaac Newton, now 24 years old, packs up his notebooks and returns to Trinity College. He has been gone for 18 months. In that time, he has made discoveries that would normally take several lifetimes. He has worked out a new theory of light and color. He has invented calculus. He has begun developing the laws of motion. He has conceived of universal gravitation. He has designed a new kind of telescope, and he has told nobody. He returns to Cambridge and acts like a normal student. He becomes a minor fellow of the college. He continues his studies. He is quiet, unremarkable to his colleagues, just another young academic. But his former professor, a man named Isaac Barrow, is perceptive. Barrow begins to notice that this young fellow Newton has an extraordinary mathematical ability. Newton helps Barrow with some problems. Barrow is astonished at Newton's solutions. In 1669, something remarkable happens. Isaac Barrow is the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at Cambridge. This is a prestigious position, one of the most important academic posts in England. Barrow is only 38 years old. He should hold this position for decades. But Barrow sees Newton's genius, and in an almost unheard-of act of generosity, Barrow resigns his position so that Newton can have it. At age 26, Isaac Newton becomes the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, the same chair that Stephen Hawking will hold 300 years later. Newton is younger than most of his students, and he is now responsible for giving public lectures on mathematics. He is terrible at it, absolutely awful. His lectures are too advanced, too abstract. He explains things poorly. He has no patience for students who do not understand immediately. Often, no students show up to his lectures. He walks into an empty room, delivers his lecture to the walls, and leaves. Newton does not care. He never wanted to be a teacher. He wants to think, to discover, to solve problems alone in his rooms. He has a few rooms in Trinity College now, and he converts them into a workshop and laboratory. He sets up furnaces, equipment for grinding lenses, tables covered with papers and books and instruments. He begins to work on building his reflecting telescope, using metal mirrors instead of glass lenses. He has to teach himself metalworking, how to cast the right alloy, how to polish it to perfect smoothness, how to calculate the exact curve the mirror needs. After many attempts, he succeeds. He creates a telescope only 6 inches long that has the power of a normal 6-foot telescope. It is a marvel of engineering and design. News of this telescope spreads. In 1671, the Royal Society in London hears about it. The Royal Society is the most important scientific organisation in England. The greatest minds in the country are members. They invite Newton to send the telescope to London so they can examine it. Newton agrees. He carefully packs his small telescope and sends it to London. The members of the Royal Society are amazed. They have never seen anything like it. So small, so powerful, so clever in its design. In January 1672, they elect Isaac Newton as a Fellow of the Royal Society. Newton is honoured, pleased. For a brief moment, he considers sharing more of his discoveries. Maybe the world is ready to appreciate his work. Maybe he can finally reveal what he has been hiding all these years. This is a mistake. Newton is about to learn a painful lesson about the price of going public with revolutionary ideas. Chapter 7. The Telescope Wars. It is 1672. Isaac Newton, now 29 years old, has just been elected to the Royal Society. He is feeling confident, appreciated, recognized. Maybe the world is not so hostile after all. Maybe he can share his discoveries without being hurt. So Newton decides to publish. He writes up his theory of light and colours, the prism experiments, the discovery that white light is a mixture, the proof that colours are fundamental properties of light itself, not modifications created by prisms or other objects. This is revolutionary work. It contradicts centuries of established belief. But Newton thinks his experiments are so clear, his logic so airtight, that everyone will simply accept the truth he has discovered. In February 1672, Newton's paper is read before the Royal Society. The response is initially positive. People are impressed, intrigued. This is fascinating work. But then the criticisms begin, and they come from a man named Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke is the Royal Society's curator of experiments. He is brilliant. He has made discoveries in dozens of fields: biology, physics, architecture. He designed much of London after the Great Fire. He discovered cells, he improved microscopes, he studied springs and elasticity. He is one of the most accomplished scientists in England. He is also competitive, proud, easily offended, and he does not like being contradicted. Hooke reads Newton's paper and immediately attacks it. He claims Newton's theory is wrong, that light is a wave, not particles, that colours are created by disturbances in light, not fundamental properties. He dismisses Newton's careful experiments with vague hand-waving. Newton is devastated. This is his worst nightmare coming true. He shares his work, and instead of gratitude and admiration, he gets criticism, attack, dismissal. Other scientists chime in. Some support Newton, but others side with Hooke or offer their own competing theories. A scientific debate erupts, the kind of debate that is actually healthy for science, testing ideas, questioning assumptions, demanding better evidence. But Newton cannot see it this way. To him, this is not healthy debate. This is persecution. He thinks his experiments speak for themselves. Anyone who questions them must be stupid or malicious. Newton writes angry letters defending his work, long, bitter letters. He argues with Hooke, with others. The tone gets personal, nasty, and then Newton decides he has had enough. In November 1676, Newton writes to the Royal Society. He wants to resign his fellowship. He is done with science, done with sharing, done with the whole horrible business of dealing with other people. He writes, "Philosophy is such an impertinently litigious lady that a man had as good be engaged in lawsuits as have to do with her." The Royal Society begs him not to resign. They smooth things over, they keep him as a fellow. But Newton makes a decision in his heart. He will not publish again. He will not share his discoveries. He will work in private, and the world can wait. This pattern will repeat throughout Newton's life. He makes incredible discoveries. He hides them. Finally, under pressure, he shares. He is criticized or challenged. He explodes with rage, and he retreats back into secrecy. The abandoned child is still there, inside the adult genius, terrified of rejection, unable to trust, responding to any challenge as an existential threat. For the next decade, Newton largely withdraws from public scientific life. He gives his required lectures at Cambridge. But privately, he descends into something even stranger than his normal work. He becomes obsessed with alchemy. Chapter 8. The Alchemy of Secrets. It is the 1670s and 1680s. Isaac Newton is the Lucasian professor at Cambridge. To the outside world, he is a respectable mathematician and natural philosopher. But inside his rooms, something very different is happening. Newton has set up furnaces. He is heating metals, boiling chemicals, conducting experiments that fill his rooms with toxic fumes, mercury vapor, lead compounds, arsenic. He works through the night, tending his furnaces, taking notes by candlelight. He is practicing alchemy, the ancient art of trying to transform base metals into gold, of seeking the philosopher's stone, of unlocking the secret essence of matter itself. To modernize this seems insane. How could the great Isaac Newton, the founder of modern physics, waste his time on medieval magic? It is embarrassing. Many Newton biographers have tried to downplay or ignore this period. But Newton spent more time on alchemy than on physics. We know this because he left behind over 1 million words of alchemical writings, recipes, experiments, interpretations of obscure alchemical texts. He was obsessed with this for years. Why? Was he crazy? Was he wasting his genius on superstitious nonsense? Not exactly. You have to understand how Newton saw the world. To him, there was no difference between physics and alchemy. Both were about discovering the hidden rules of nature. Both were about finding the secret code that God had written into creation. Newton believed that ancient sages had possessed secret knowledge about nature, knowledge that had been lost, hidden in coded symbols and obscure texts. He thought that by studying alchemy, he could recover this lost wisdom. He also believed that matter had active principles, that substances could transform into each other if you understood their inner nature. This was not completely wrong. We now know that elements can transform into each other. That is what happens in nuclear reactions, in stars. Newton was asking the right question, even if he had no way to find the right answer with 17th century tools. But there is something deeper going on. Newton is wounded. The fight with Hooke and others has driven him back into isolation. Alchemy gives him something to obsess over privately, something no one can criticize because he is not sharing it, something that feels like a secret quest for hidden truth. He sleeps only 2 or 3 hours a night. He forgets to eat. His assistant often finds him standing in his room at dawn, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, having never gone to bed, staring at his papers, lost in thought. Is this brilliance, or is it a kind of madness? Maybe it is both. Maybe they cannot be separated in a mind like Newton's. During these years, Newton rarely publishes anything. He keeps to himself. He nurses his grudges. He works on his secret projects. To the scientific world, he is almost invisible. Then, in 1684, something happens that pulls Newton back into the light. A visitor comes to Cambridge, a young astronomer with a question. Chapter 9. The Challenge, Halley's Question. August 1684. A charming young astronomer named Edmund Halley arrives at Trinity College. He is looking for Isaac Newton. Halley has heard that Newton is brilliant at mathematics, and Halley has a problem that needs solving. There is a debate going on among natural philosophers in London. Everyone knows that planets orbit the sun. Kepler discovered that they move in ellipses, not perfect circles. But why? What force keeps them in orbit? Robert Hooke has suggested that perhaps there is a force pulling planets toward the sun, an attractive force that decreases with distance, maybe following an inverse square law, getting 4 times weaker when you double the distance. But no one has been able to prove this. No one has worked out the mathematics. If there is such a force, what shape would the planetary orbits be? Circles? Ellipses? Something else? This is the question Halley brings to Newton. He finds Newton in his rooms. They talk. And then Halley asks the question: what curve would a planet follow if it is pulled toward the sun by a force that decreases with the square of the distance? Newton answers immediately, without hesitation: an ellipse. Halley is stunned. How do you know this? Have you proved it? Newton says calmly, I have calculated it. Halley is amazed. This is exactly what everyone has been arguing about in London. Can Newton show him the proof? Newton rummages through his papers. Stacks and stacks of manuscripts, notes, calculations. He searches for the proof he did years ago, but he cannot find it. Finally, Newton says he will work it out again and send it to Halley. Halley thanks him and returns to London. He is sceptical but hopeful. Did Newton really solve this problem? Or was he bluffing? But Newton was not bluffing, and Halley has just lit a fuse. Newton is now thinking about gravity again, about planetary motion, about the problem he put aside nearly 20 years ago during the plague years. This time, the measurements of Earth's size are better, more accurate. Newton redoes his calculations, and now they work. His inverse square law of gravity predicts the moon's orbit perfectly. But Newton does not just send Halley a simple proof. Once Newton starts working on this problem, he cannot stop. It opens up everything. All his old ideas about motion and force and gravity come flooding back. and he realizes he can explain everything. The planets, the tides, the shape of the Earth, comets, all of it governed by the same mathematical laws. Newton decides to write it all down, every proof, every calculation, every consequence of his discoveries. He will create a complete system of the world, a mathematical explanation of all motion in the universe. This will become his masterpiece, the Principia Mathematica. But writing it will nearly destroy him. Chapter 10. Writing the Principia, 18 months of madness autumn, 1684. Isaac Newton is 41 years old, and he is about to enter a period of work so intense, so all-consuming, that it seems barely human. He is going to write the most important book in the history of science, a book that will explain motion, gravity, the structure of the solar system, the tides, the shape of the Earth, and the paths of comets. A book that will prove that the universe runs on mathematical laws, that nature is predictable, that the heavens and the earth follow the same rules. He calls it Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica, the mathematical principles of natural philosophy. The Principia for short. For the next 18 months, Newton works almost without pause. His assistant, a man named Humphrey Newton, no relation, later describes what he witnesses, and it is terrifying. Newton sleeps 2 hours a night, sometimes less. Humphrey often finds him in the morning standing in his room exactly where he left him the night before, still dressed, having never gone to bed, staring at papers covered with calculations. Newton forgets to eat. Meals are brought to his room. They sit untouched. Hours later, Humphrey finds the food cold and uneaten. Newton simply forgot that he needs food. He barely speaks. He moves through the college like a ghost. When he does give lectures, his mind is clearly elsewhere. Sometimes he talks to an empty room, apparently not even noticing that no students came. What is happening inside Newton's mind during these months? He is building a complete mathematical description of motion. He starts with 3 simple laws, 3 principles that will govern everything. First law: an object in motion stays in motion in a straight line unless a force acts on it. An object at rest stays at rest unless a force acts on it. This is called inertia. Things keep doing what they are doing. Second law: force equals mass times acceleration. F equals m times a. The more force you apply, the more acceleration you get. The more massive an object is, the less it accelerates for the same force. Third law: for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. When you push on something, it pushes back on you with equal force in the opposite direction. These 3 laws seem simple, but from them, Newton derives everything: how projectiles fly, how pendulums swing, how objects roll down ramps, how friction works. Every possible kind of motion can be analyzed using these laws. But Newton needs new mathematics to do this analysis. The old geometry is not powerful enough, so he uses the calculus he invented during the plague years, his method of fluxions, the mathematics of change. With calculus and the 3 laws of motion, Newton can solve any mechanics problem. But he goes further. He proves that if gravity follows an inverse square law, planets must orbit in ellipses with the Sun at one focus, exactly as Kepler observed. Newton shows that Kepler's laws are not just empirical observations, they are consequences of deeper mathematical principles. He calculates the tides, showing that they are caused by the Moon's gravity pulling on the oceans, and the Sun's gravity too, to a lesser extent. This is why tides follow the Moon's cycle. He explains why the Earth is not a perfect sphere, but is slightly flattened at the poles, because it is spinning, and the spinning creates a centrifugal effect that bulges the equator outward. He analyzes comets, showing that they are not atmospheric phenomena or divine omens. They are objects following orbital paths around the Sun. Elliptical orbits, just like planets, but much more elongated. Every mystery of celestial mechanics is solved. The universe is revealed to be a vast clockwork, predictable, mathematical, knowable. But the work is crushing Newton. He develops headaches, insomnia, tremors. He is burning himself out, consuming his health and sanity to birth this book. By spring 1687, it is finished. 3 books, hundreds of propositions, thousands of calculations, the most dense, difficult, profound scientific text ever written. Edmund Halley, who started all this with his question, helps Newton prepare it for publication. The Royal Society is supposed to publish it, but they have no money. They recently published a book about fish that didn't sell. They are broke. So Halley pays for the publication himself out of his own pocket because he understands he's witnessing genius. This book will change the world, and it cannot be lost. In July 1687, the Principia is published, and the world will never be the same. Chapter 11. The book that changed everything. When the Principia first appears in July 1687, most people do not understand it. It is written in Latin. The mathematics is advanced. The style is dense. Newton deliberately made it difficult because he did not want to be bothered by people who had not taken the time to study mathematics seriously. But those who can understand it are astonished. This is not just a collection of observations or theories. This is a complete system, a mathematical framework that explains everything about how objects move, on Earth and in the heavens. For thousands of years, humans believed that the heavens and the Earth were fundamentally different. The heavens were perfect, eternal, divine, made of different substance, following different rules. The Earth was corrupt, changing, mortal. Aristotle taught this. The Church taught this. It was the accepted wisdom of civilization. Newton destroys this idea. He proves that the same laws govern everything: the apple and the moon, the cannonball and the planet, falling objects on Earth and orbiting moons around Jupiter. One set of laws, universal laws. This is revolutionary, not just scientifically, philosophically. If the heavens follow the same mechanical laws as Earth, then maybe the heavens are not divine. Maybe the universe is a machine, beautiful, precise, but ultimately mechanical. This will lead to the Enlightenment, the idea that reason and natural law can explain everything, that humanity can understand nature through mathematics and observation, that we do not need ancient authorities or religious revelation to know truth. We can discover it ourselves. The Principia becomes the foundation of physics for the next 200 years. Engineers use Newton's laws to build bridges, machines, to calculate trajectories of cannonballs, later of rockets. Astronomers use Newton's gravity law to predict planetary positions decades in advance, with perfect accuracy. In 1846, astronomers used Newton's laws to predict the existence and location of a previously unknown planet, Neptune, purely from mathematics. They point their telescopes where the calculations say it should be, and there it is, a triumph of Newtonian physics. Even in the 20th century, when Einstein shows that Newton's laws are not the final word, they remain accurate for almost all practical purposes. Every spacecraft we send into orbit uses Newtonian mechanics. Every building that stands relies on Newtonian principles. 300 years later, we are still living in Newton's universe. And Newton achieved this alone. No team, no collaborators. Just one man, thinking harder than anyone had ever thought before. But there is a dark side to this triumph. Because Newton's success breeds new conflicts, new battles, and Newton is no better at handling success than he was at handling criticism. The fight with Robert Hooke is about to explode. Chapter 12. The Hooke feud explodes. Robert Hooke reads the Principia, and he is furious. Back in 1684, around the time Halley visited Newton, Hooke had written Newton a letter. In that letter, Hooke had suggested that gravity might follow an inverse square law. He had discussed this idea with other members of the Royal Society. Now Newton has published the Principia, and the inverse square law of gravity is the centerpiece. Newton has proved it mathematically. He has shown all its consequences. He has used it to explain the entire solar system, and Hooke is not mentioned, not acknowledged, not thanked. Hooke feels robbed. He believes he gave Newton the key idea, and Newton has stolen the credit. From Newton's perspective, this is absurd. Yes, Hooke mentioned inverse square forces in a letter, but so did other people. The idea was in the AIR. Many natural philosophers suspected something like this. But suspecting and proving are completely different things. Hooke had no mathematics. He could not prove anything. He could not derive planetary orbits. He could not calculate the tides. He had a vague idea. Newton turned that vague idea into a complete mathematical theory. But Hooke demands credit. He complains to Halley, to the Royal Society, to anyone who will listen. Newton is enraged. This is exactly why he hates sharing his work. People trying to steal credit, claiming ownership of his discoveries. He responds with fury. Newton goes through the Principia and removes every mention of Hooke, even acknowledgements that had nothing to do with gravity. Hooke's name is systematically erased from the book. Newton writes to Halley, "Philosophy is such an impertinently litigious lady that a man had as good be engaged in lawsuits as have to do with her. I will never publish anything about philosophy again." But Newton does not stop there. For the rest of his life, Newton will hold this grudge against Hooke. He will never forgive him. In 1703, Robert Hooke dies, Newton becomes president of the Royal Society shortly after. And one of the first things that happens is that the portrait of Robert Hooke, which hung in the Royal Society building, disappears. To this day, no certain portrait of Robert Hooke exists. The most likely explanation is that Newton had it destroyed. Think about that. One of the greatest experimental scientists England ever produced, and we do not know what he looked like, because Isaac Newton hated him so much that he erased him from history. This is Newton's dark side, his inability to forgive, his paranoia about credit, his conviction that anyone who questions him is an enemy trying to steal from him. The child abandoned at age 3 is still there, still terrified of betrayal, still lashing out at anyone who threatens his sense of control. And the Hooke feud is just the beginning. Newton's next battle will be even worse, longer, more bitter, more destructive. The calculus wars are coming. Chapter 13, The Calculus Wars, Leibniz, 1693. Isaac Newton is 50 years old. The Principia has been published for 6 years. Newton is famous now, recognized as one of the greatest minds in Europe. But he is about to enter the most vicious intellectual battle of his life. The dispute is over calculus. Who invented it? Who deserves the credit? Newton developed calculus during the plague years of 1665 and 1666. He called it the method of fluxions. He used it in the Principia, though he presented most of the proofs using traditional geometry to make them more accessible. But Newton did not publish a full account of his calculus method until much later. He kept it mostly private, shared with a few correspondents, but not published. Meanwhile, in Germany, a brilliant philosopher and mathematician named Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was working on the same problems. And in 1684, Leibniz published his version of calculus. Leibniz's notation was different from Newton's. Actually, it was better, clearer, more flexible. It is the notation we still use today, the notation you learn if you take a calculus class. That is Leibniz's notation, not Newton's. For several years, both men are aware of each other's work. There is some correspondence, some mutual respect. Leibniz visited London in the 1670s and saw some of Newton's papers, but there is no open conflict. Then, slowly, suspicions begin to grow. Did Leibniz see Newton's work on calculus during his London visit? Did he steal the ideas and publish them as his own? From our modern perspective, the answer is clear. Both men discovered calculus independently. This happens in mathematics and science. When a problem is ripe for solving, multiple people often solve it around the same time. There is no theft, just parallel discovery. But Newton cannot accept this. To him, there can only be one inventor. And if Leibniz is claiming to have invented calculus, he must be lying. He must have stolen it from Newton. The dispute simmers through the 1690s. Newton's supporters and Leibniz's supporters begin exchanging increasingly hostile letters. Accusations fly. The tone gets nasty. In 1712, the conflict reaches its peak. Leibniz appeals to the Royal Society to settle the matter. Who really invented calculus first? This seems like a reasonable request, an impartial investigation by the leading scientific body in England. Let the evidence decide. But there is a problem. Newton is now the president of the Royal Society. He has been president since 1703, and he is going to run this investigation himself. Newton appoints a committee. Officially, they are supposed to examine the evidence impartially. But Newton secretly writes the committee's report himself. He authors the document declaring that he, Isaac Newton, is the true and first inventor of calculus, and that Leibniz is at best a second discoverer, at worst a plagiarist. This is not justice, this is a rigged trial. Newton is judge, jury, and witness. But Newton goes even further. He writes an anonymous review of the report and publishes it in the Royal Society's journal, praising the report he himself secretly wrote, attacking Leibniz. Leibniz is devastated. His reputation is destroyed. He tries to defend himself, but he is fighting the most powerful scientific figure in Europe, and he is losing. In 1716, Gottfried Leibniz dies, alone, depressed. His last years consumed by this bitter fight. Newton has won. But at what cost? He has poisoned European mathematics, created a divide between British and continental mathematicians that lasts for generations. British mathematicians stick with Newton's inferior notation and fall behind. Continental mathematicians use Leibniz's superior notation and advance more quickly, all because Newton could not share credit, could not accept that someone else might be equally brilliant, could not tolerate the idea that intellectual discovery might be a communal enterprise rather than a solo achievement. The abandoned child from Woolsthorpe is still in control, still demanding that he be first, only, alone. Chapter 14. The Impossible Friendship. Newton and Fatio. But there was one person who got close to Isaac Newton, one relationship that for a brief time seemed to break through Newton's walls of isolation. A young Swiss mathematician named Nicolas Fatio de Douy, Fatio arrived in London in 1687, the same year the Principia was published. He was brilliant, charming, much younger than Newton, only 23 years old. He admired Newton intensely. He studied the Principia and understood it better than almost anyone. And somehow Fatio managed to become Newton's friend. They began corresponding, frequently, intensely, letters full of affection and intellectual collaboration. They visited each other, worked on problems together. For Newton, this was extraordinary. He did not have friends, he did not let people close. But Fatio was different, perhaps because he worshipped Newton. He did not compete, he did not challenge, he simply adored. And Newton, starved for connection his whole life, opened up. For a few years, in the early 1690s, Newton seems almost happy as Newton could be. He has a companion, someone who understands his work, someone he trusts, or almost trusts. They make plans to live near each other. Fatio even considers moving to Cambridge to be close to Newton. Newton helps Fatio financially. There is talk of Fatio editing a new edition of the Principia. But then, in 1693, something breaks. We do not know exactly what happened, but Newton has some kind of breakdown. He writes paranoid letters to friends, strange, accusatory letters. To the philosopher John Locke, Newton writes that Locke tried to embroil him with women. To the astronomer Flamsteed, he writes bizarre accusations. He claims people are plotting against him. He cannot sleep. He's not eating. Some historians think this was mercury poisoning from his alchemy experiments. Newton had been exposed to toxic fumes for years. Mercury poisoning causes paranoia, insomnia, tremors. All symptoms Newton displayed. Other historians think it was a psychological crisis. Perhaps the intensity of his relationship with Fatio overwhelmed him. Perhaps he got too close and it terrified him. Perhaps the abandoned child inside could not believe that someone would stay. So he sabotaged the relationship before he could be hurt again. Whatever the cause, Newton severs his friendship with Fatio, cuts him off. The intense correspondence stops. The relationship ends. Fatio is heartbroken. He later becomes one of Newton's most vicious defenders in the calculus wars, attacking Leibniz with almost unhinged fury, as if channeling his own pain and rejection into Newton's battles. Newton recovers from his breakdown, but he is alone again, and he will remain alone for the rest of his life. No more close friendships, no more vulnerability. The walls go back up, higher than ever. Chapter 15, Master of the Mint, Power and Revenge, 1696. Isaac Newton is 53 years old. He has been at Cambridge for 35 years, and he is tired. Tired of lecturing to empty rooms, tired of the isolation, tired of alchemy experiments that lead nowhere. An opportunity arises. The British government offers Newton a position, Warden of the Royal Mint, later promoted to Master of the Mint. This is the institution that makes England's money. Coins, currency. Most people would see this as a ceremonial job, a comfortable retirement position for a famous scholar. Good pay, minimal work, just oversee things. But Newton is not most people. He accepts the position and moves to London permanently. He leaves Cambridge forever, and he attacks his new job with the same obsessive intensity he brings to everything. England's currency is in crisis. Coins are being clipped. People shave off bits of silver from the edges of coins. The coins lose value. Counterfeiters are making fake coins. The economy is in chaos. Newton's job is to reform the currency, create new coins that cannot be clipped, and catch the counterfeiters. Newton becomes a detective. He goes into taverns and slums in disguise, gathering information about counterfeiters. He interrogates suspects in prison. He offers deals to informants. Turn in your partners and we will be lenient. He is relentless. He personally pursues over 100 cases. He sends at least 15 men to the gallows. Execution by hanging for counterfeiting. Why is the great scientist doing this? Why does Newton care so passionately about catching criminals? Because Newton needs control. He needs order. Counterfeiting is chaos. It is people breaking the rules, and Newton cannot tolerate that. The same mind that needs the universe to follow mathematical laws needs society to follow legal laws. Also, the job makes him rich. The Master of the Mint receives a percentage of all the coins produced. Newton becomes wealthy, far wealthier than he ever was as a professor. He lives in London with his niece, Catherine Barton. She serves as his housekeeper and hostess. She is beautiful, charming, social. Everything Newton is not. She helps him navigate London society. Newton also maintains his position at Cambridge, though he never returns. He collects both salaries. He is now rich, powerful, and respected. In 1703, Robert Hooke dies, and Newton becomes president of the Royal Society. He will hold this position for the next 24 years, until his death. As president, Newton rules the society like a tyrant. He dominates meetings. He controls what gets published in the society's journal. He uses the position to fight his battles against Hooke's legacy, against Leibniz, against anyone who questions him. Newton is at the height of his power and influence, but he is also in his 60s now, getting old, and he still cannot rest, still cannot stop working, still cannot forgive. Chapter 16. The God Question. While Newton is running the Royal Mint and the Royal Society, while he is fighting the calculus wars and persecuting counterfeiters, he is also working on something he can never publish. Something that could get him executed if it became known. Isaac Newton does not believe in the Trinity. The Trinity is a core doctrine of Christianity. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Three persons in one God. The Church of England requires belief in the Trinity. It is heresy to deny it, heresy punishable by death. But Newton, after studying the Bible and early church history, concludes that the Trinity is a corruption, a false doctrine added centuries after Christ. He believes in God the Father and Jesus as the Messiah, but he does not believe they are the same being. This is dangerous. If Newton's views became public, he could lose everything: his positions, his reputation, possibly his life. So Newton writes thousands of pages analyzing scripture, calculating biblical prophecy, trying to determine the true nature of God. And he keeps it all private, hidden, secret. He also writes extensively on the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, trying to calculate when the end of the world will come. His conclusion: the year 2060. We are living in the time period Newton thought would lead to the apocalypse. But here is what is important to understand about Newton's religion. He does not see a conflict between science and faith. To Newton, they are the same quest. God created the universe according to mathematical laws. Studying those laws is studying God's mind. Gravity is not just a force, it is God's will expressed in mathematical form. The beauty and order of the cosmos prove God's existence. Newton writes, "This most beautiful system of the sun, planets and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." To Newton, atheism is absurd. The universe is too ordered, too perfect to be an accident. The laws of motion and gravity are so precise, so elegant, they must be divine design. But Newton also believes that God does not intervene constantly. God set up the laws at the beginning, and now the universe runs like a clock. Occasionally, God might need to make small adjustments to keep things running smoothly, but mostly the machine runs on its own. This view will inspire the deists of the 18th century. The idea that God is like a divine watchmaker who built the universe, wound it up, and now largely lets it run. But Newton would be horrified by later atheistic uses of his work. The idea that the universe is just a machine with no creator. To Newton, the machine proves the engineer. His gravestone will later read, "Let mortals rejoice that such and so great an ornament of the human race has existed." Chapter 17. The Final Years, An Old Man's Fears, the 1720s. Isaac Newton is in his 70s, white-haired, wealthy, famous throughout Europe. Visitors come from across the continent just to meet him, to see the great philosopher in person. But Newton is bitter. He is still fighting old battles, still editing new editions of the Principia, still trying to perfect his arguments, still unable to let go of old grudges. He never reconciles with the memory of Robert Hooke, even though Hooke has been dead for 20 years. He never acknowledges Leibniz's contributions to calculus, even though Leibniz is also dead. The grudges outlive the people. Newton has never married, never had children. He has a few relatives he supports financially, his niece Catherine, some cousins, but no close family, no intimate companions. He attends meetings of the Royal Society when his health permits. He still tries to control everything, to have the last word on every dispute, to maintain his authority. But his body is failing. Kidney stones cause him agonizing pain. Gout makes it difficult to walk. His hands shake, yet his mind remains sharp. He is still calculating, still revising, still working. In 1722, he sits for a portrait. The painter captures an exhausted old man, eyes still piercing, intelligent, but tired, haunted. There is no peace in that face. People ask him how he made his discoveries. How did he see what no one else could see? Newton's answer is telling. He says, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." This is false modesty, but it also reveals something true. Newton knows there is more to discover. The universe is vast, and even his genius only scratched the surface. On March 20th, 1727, Isaac Newton dies peacefully in his sleep. He is 84 years old, one of the longest lives of his era. England gives him a state funeral. He is buried in Westminster Abbey, among kings, among heroes, the first scientist ever given such an honor. Voltaire, the French philosopher, is visiting England at the time. He attends the funeral, and he is astonished. In France, scientists are not honored this way, but in England, Newton is treated like royalty. Voltaire writes, "I have seen a professor of mathematics, simply because he was great in his vocation, buried like a king who had done good to his subjects." This is how much Newton's work mattered. He changed not just science, he changed how society values science. He proved that the human mind, through reason and mathematics, could unlock the deepest secrets of nature. And in doing so, he made the modern world possible. Chapter 18. What he left behind, the Newtonian universe. After Newton's death in 1727, his influence does not fade. It grows. For the next 200 years, Newton's laws will dominate physics. His vision of the universe will shape how humanity sees reality itself. The Principia becomes the foundation of all physics. Every scientist must master it. Every new discovery must fit within the Newtonian framework. The three laws of motion, the law of universal gravitation. These are treated almost like scripture, universal truths that cannot be questioned. Engineers used Newton's laws to build the Industrial Revolution. Bridges, steam engines, factories, railways, all of these require understanding forces, motion, acceleration. All of these are applied Newtonian mechanics. Astronomers use Newton's gravity law to predict planetary positions with perfect accuracy. They can tell you exactly where Mars will be in 10 years, where Jupiter's moons will be in 50 years. The predictions are flawless. In 1846, something extraordinary happens. Astronomers notice that the planet Uranus is not moving exactly as Newton's laws predict. There is a tiny wobble in its orbit. Something is pulling on it. Using only Newton's mathematics, two scientists independently calculate where an unknown planet must be to cause this wobble. They predict its position in the sky. They tell observers where to look. And when the telescopes point to that spot, there it is, a new planet, Neptune. Discovered not by looking through a telescope first, but by mathematics. By trusting Newton's laws so completely that you can predict the existence of entire worlds you have never seen. This is the power of the Newtonian universe. It is predictable, deterministic. If you know the position and velocity of every particle in the universe right now, you can calculate where they will all be at any future time. The universe is like a vast clockwork, perfect, mechanical, knowable. This worldview has profound philosophical implications. If the universe is a machine following fixed laws, what does that mean for free will? For God? For human purpose? The Enlightenment of the 18th century flows directly from Newton's work. Philosophers like Voltaire, Kant, and others are inspired by Newton's success. If the universe can be understood through reason, maybe society can be perfected through reason too. Maybe we do not need kings and priests telling us what to think. We can figure it out ourselves through observation and logic. The American and French revolutions are partly inspired by Newtonian thinking, natural law, rights that can be derived from first principles, governments that should run like well-designed machines. Newton's influence extends into every field: economics, biology, chemistry. Even fields that do not exist yet in Newton's time will be shaped by his approach. Find the fundamental laws. Express them mathematically. Derive all consequences logically. For 2 centuries, the Newtonian universe is reality. This is not just a way of seeing the world, it is the way. And then in 1905, a 26-year-old patent clerk in Switzerland named Albert Einstein publishes a paper on special relativity. And the Newtonian universe begins to crack. Einstein shows that Newton's laws are not exactly right. At very high speeds, close to the speed of light, Newton's equations give the wrong answers. Time and space are not absolute. They are relative. They bend and flex. In 1915, Einstein publishes General Relativity, and this completely revolutionizes gravity. Gravity is not a force pulling objects together. It is a curvature of space-time itself. Mass tells space-time how to curve. Curved space-time tells matter how to move. This is radically different from Newton's vision. Does this mean Newton was wrong? No, Newton was incomplete. His laws are a special case of Einstein's more general laws. At everyday speeds and everyday masses, Newton's equations are still perfectly accurate. The difference between Newtonian and Einsteinian physics only shows up in extreme situations. Very high speeds, very strong gravity fields. For building bridges, launching satellites, calculating trajectories, Newton's laws are still what we use. They are simpler, easier to calculate, and accurate enough. Even Einstein himself said, "Newton's Principia is perhaps the greatest intellectual stride that it has ever been granted to any man to make." 300 years after its publication, we are still using the Principia, still teaching Newton's laws to every physics student, still relying on his insights to build our technology. The GPS in your phone uses both Newton and Einstein. Newtonian mechanics to calculate orbits, Einsteinian relativity to correct for time dilation effects. The modern world rests on Newton's shoulders, even when we go beyond him. Chapter 19, The Price of Genius, What Newton Lost. But let us return to the man himself. Not the legend, not the laws. The actual human being named Isaac Newton. What did his genius cost him? Newton lived 84 years, and he was alone for almost all of them. He never married, never had a romantic relationship that we know of, never had children, never had a true, lasting friendship. He had colleagues, people he worked with, people he fought with, but not friends, not people he trusted, not people he opened his heart to. The closest he came was Nicolas Fatio, and that relationship terrified him so much that he destroyed it, cut it off, went through a mental breakdown rather than sustain intimacy. Why? Why was someone so brilliant at understanding the universe so incapable of understanding human connection? The answer goes back to Woolsthorpe Manor. Christmas Day, 1642. The tiny, premature baby who was not expected to survive. The father who died before he was born. The mother who abandoned him at age 3. That wound never healed. Newton carried it his entire life. He could not trust people, could not believe anyone would stay, could not risk being vulnerable. So he built walls, walls of achievement, walls of secrecy, walls of anger and suspicion. Anyone who got close was eventually pushed away. Anyone who challenged him became an enemy. Robert Hooke makes a legitimate scientific criticism. Newton hates him for life, tries to erase him from history. Gottfried Leibniz discovers calculus independently. Newton sees it as theft, wages a decades-long war to destroy his reputation. Even people who admired Newton found him difficult, cold, impossible to get close to. His assistant Humphrey describes him as so focused on his work that he barely seemed to notice other people existed. Was this necessary? Could Newton have been different? Could he have been both a genius and a warm, connected human being? We will never know. Maybe for Newton, the isolation was necessary. Maybe some minds only work when they are alone, free from the distractions and compromises of relationships, free to descend into obsessive focus for months or years at a time. Or maybe Newton could have been happier if he had healed from his childhood wounds, if he had learned to trust, to collaborate, to share both his triumphs and his struggles. We do know that Newton himself, late in life, expressed regret, not about his science, but about his relationships, the fights, the bitterness, the time wasted on grudges. In his final years, when visitors asked about his disputes with Hooke and Leibniz, Newton sometimes seemed tired of it all, weary of the battles, but unable to let them go. He achieved everything a scientist could achieve: fame, wealth, honor, immortal legacy, but he never achieved peace, never achieved contentment, never achieved love. The boy who was abandoned at age 3 remained abandoned, even when surrounded by admirers, even when the whole world knew his name. Deep inside, he was still alone. This is the tragedy of Isaac Newton, that the same qualities that made him a genius also made him miserable. The obsession, the inability to let go, the need for complete control. These drove his discoveries, and they poisoned his life. Can we admire his achievements while acknowledging his pain? Can we be grateful for his gifts to humanity while recognizing what they cost him? I think we must, because Newton was human, flawed, wounded, brilliant, terrible, generous with knowledge and miserly with trust, revolutionary and petty, all at once. He showed us the universe, but he never found peace in it. We began this story with an apple falling in a garden. Let us end there too. An apple falls. It has fallen countless times before. Billions of people have seen apples fall. But Isaac Newton saw something different. He saw a connection. He saw that the force pulling the apple is the same force holding the moon in orbit, the same force binding the solar system together, the same force that makes the tides rise and fall. One force, universal, mathematical, knowable. This is genius, not just being smart, not just solving difficult problems, but seeing patterns that no one else can see. Making connections that seem obvious only after someone points them out. Before Newton, the universe was mysterious. Why do things fall? No one really knew. Why do planets move in ellipses? Kepler discovered they do, but not why. How does light work? What is color? How do you predict motion? All mysteries, all unanswered, all seemingly unknowable. After Newton, we had answers, mathematical answers, testable answers, answers that worked, that let us predict, that let us build, that let us understand. Newton was not a pleasant man. Let us be honest about that. He was paranoid, vindictive, unable to forgive, terrible at relationships. He wasted years on pointless feuds. He tried to erase his rivals from history, but he was also the greatest scientific mind who ever lived. In a farmhouse during a plague, with only books and his mind, he revolutionized human understanding. He saw what no one else could see. He proved what everyone else thought was unprovable. His three laws of motion are still the foundation of mechanics. His law of universal gravitation is still used to launch satellites and navigate spacecraft. His work in optics revolutionized how we understand light. His invention of calculus is still taught to every science and engineering student. Before Newton, science was philosophy, speculation, argument. After Newton, science was mathematics, experiment, proof. He showed us how to do science, not just what to discover, but how to discover it. Every telescope that gazes into space, every rocket that escapes Earth's gravity, every GPS satellite that tells you where you are, every bridge that stands, every airplane that flies. All of these exist because Isaac Newton sat in a room and thought. He asked, what if the laws of the heavens are the same as the laws of Earth? What if nature speaks mathematics? What if we can understand the universe? And he proved that we can. 300 years later, we are still living in the world Newton made. The modern world, the scientific world, the world where nature is not magic, but mechanism, not mystery, but mathematics. When you board an airplane, remember that it flies because of principles Newton discovered. When you use your phone's GPS, remember that the satellites orbit according to equations Newton wrote. When you look up at the night sky and think about the vast cosmos, remember that one man in 17th century England made it knowable. Isaac Newton was alone most of his life, by choice, by wounds, by necessity. But his work connects all of us, to the universe, to each other, to the fundamental laws that govern reality itself. He never found love, but he gave humanity something precious, understanding, the knowledge that we are not helpless in a chaotic universe, that there are rules, patterns, laws we can learn. This is Newton's gift. This is his legacy. Not just the specific discoveries, though those are monumental, but the proof that human minds can unlock nature's secrets, that we can think our way to truth. The apple falls, again and again, as it always has, as it always will. But now we understand why. Because one strange, troubled, brilliant man refused to accept mystery when he could have knowledge. Isaac Newton invented modern science, and in doing so, he invented the modern world. The farmhouse at Woolsthorpe still stands. You can visit it, walk through the rooms where calculus was born, stand in the garden where gravity revealed itself. Feel the presence of genius in that quiet place. And if you are very still, very quiet, you might sense what Newton felt. That hunger to understand, that drive to see deeper, that refusal to accept ignorance when knowledge is possible. The apple falls, and the universe reveals itself to those brave enough to look. This is how one man changed everything. This is the story of Isaac Newton. Hey there, if you're still here, congratulations, and thank you for sticking around and supporting what I've created. I hope you enjoyed this narrative journey. If you have anything to share, feedback, criticism, or just your thoughts, feel free to drop a comment. I'd also love to hear any suggestions you have for upcoming projects. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this one, there are more videos waiting for you to explore. Appreciate it.